Penguin Random House Canada presents This Way Up, Old Friends, New Love, and a Map for the Road Ahead by Cathrin Bradbury, read for you by the author. To Kelly and Mary. Let's go out and fight the storm. Margaret Atwood, Blizzard. Something tells me you will never do anything more vital, more profound, more perfect, or more necessary than what you are doing right now. Gwendolyn McEwen, Sunlight at Sherburne and Bloor. 1. My map. I was going to need a map. It was one of those 3 a.m. ideas with the undistracted clarity only the smallest hours of the day can provide. I usually grabbed my phone from the bedside table to act on these thoughts instantly, often to my sorrow. My brain lagged, trying to understand why the pour-over kettle I'd ordered arrived thumb-sized until I read the fine print. Perfect for your dollhouse. My first and only foray into vibrators, recommended by the New York Times Wirecutter, so what could go wrong, was the Magic Wand, a name that suggested wizardly sprightliness, not the police truncheon that showed up at my doorstep. Fine print for women who like a lot of power. "Measure once, measure twice, measure 3 times, said my brother Tim, a carpenter, after the fridge I'd ordered didn't fit in the allotted space. It was my first new appliance post-divorce. Don't you know that's the cardinal rule before you buy anything? No, Tim, I don't know that rule. Do you know the rule that you blow-dry your hair from back to front with the brush held above your head? So I took care when I ordered my map. Obviously, I couldn't buy a map to where I was headed. Even my deliriously clear 3 a.m. brain understood that any journey into the land of old is uncharted territory, although the signposts were everywhere. The way I could open a bottle of cranberry juice one day, and the next day I could not, a skill unlikely to return. Discovering on a hiking trip with friends that at least half of them had to pee more often than I did, and being triumphant. I mean, it made the whole trip. Walking into a table or chair, furniture that had always been there, no one was moving it around in the night, and finding myself apologizing to a footstool. How my adult children had begun to speak to me in exclamation marks. "Mom, be careful! Mom, what are you doing?" Being eulogized when you're sitting right there. Remember the time, Cathrin? The transporting joy in the smallest moments. A 20-year-old running legs high in the cold winter morning. A lone bird calling at night, too early for spring. The liberation from the tyranny of things that matter. Not apathy, but that time's too short, or moving too fast. The onrush of time that you don't have time for. Or perhaps that time unexpectedly has become too vast for petty things to get a handhold. I try to put myself in the way of time when it expands like that, when this newfound space of time makes it an ally instead of an enemy. These changes are so gradual you almost miss them, until they become who you are now. A person with sudden ineptitudes, who triumphs in petty victories, worries much less than she used to, and is parented by her children. Yet she has found the supernatural ability, at last, to inhabit a moment, and bumps into furniture. The accumulation becomes the evidence that you're in new territory. If I couldn't get a map to my future, I could at least find one that showed me where I'd come from. Lately, where I'm going and where I've been felt more and more like the same question. When you're a kid, time's so slow, the recent past is ancient history. You can't wait to move beyond it, to be 9 when you're 7. But at 68, my past and present had a newfound fluency. The older I got, the closer the places from my childhood became, until we walked around arm in arm like long-lost friends. At 3:15 a.m., I paid Amazon $5.95 for a street map of the place where I was born and then lived for the first 6 years of my life. St. Catherine's is a southern Ontario city next door to Niagara Falls. When I was a child, it was in its boom days, but now it was one of those slumped, mid-sized cities with most of its industry long gone and much of its downtown boarded up. Writers often describe how the locations of their stories choose them, how the first thing they know about a book is where it will be set. For some reason, St. Catherine's was choosing me. Other places have more resonance in my life. Grimsby, the town we moved to after St. Catherine's and where I spent my formative years. Toronto, the city I'd made my home after university and had stayed ever since. The North, where I've traveled since I was a child and where my imagination lives. But it was the little thought of, barely remembered town I was born in nearly 7 decades ago that had become a glint in my mind, demanding my attention. The first problem with my new map when it arrived 2 days later was that the type was the size of salt. I needed a magnifying glass to see anything, and even then it was impossible to read the street names. "Take a picture with your phone and expand it," said my friend Ellen from up the street, who excelled at life hacks. But the second problem was that I didn't know what I was looking for because, as I said, I left St. Catherine's very young. My mind held clues like runes. Don't play in the gully. What gully? And the excited feeling of crossing a high bridge across a deep expanse I couldn't find on the map. And running with dozens of kids on the cul-de-sac where our post-wartime bungalow sat. Our street name, I hadn't forgotten, was Argyle Crescent. I liked the sound of living on a crescent, swinging my legs on the curve of the moon, but I had no idea where to find it on my map. My older brother Tim and his wife Nancy both grew up on our street in St. Catherine's. Tim really did marry the girl next door. So I invited them over to my house, ostensibly for their son's birthday celebration, but really to look at my map. Before they arrived, I spread it over the table we'd soon be eating off. It took up the whole table. Come in, I said, swinging open the front door. "It's windy out, isn't it? Let me take your jackets. Watch the step." We hugged and kissed in the entryway, but all I could think about was my map, waiting to be introduced like an unexpected guest. "Right this way," I said, waving them into the dining room. My map did not disappoint. It was the hit of the party. It took me places, too, the way only a map can. 2. Where are we now? It was on the afternoon the bike courier ran into me that I first began to think the questions I'd been trying to ask myself weren't about identity. Who am I now? But about location. Where am I now? My biker was one of about a dozen couriers taking a break on the sidewalk, the shiny black coolers that delivered food from somewhere in the city to somewhere else resting briefly at their feet. There was plenty of room for me to get by as I walked toward them, and then, "Ouch, what? Sorry," I apologized when he stumbled into me. This man was maybe 25. His job was to zigzag around cars, people, and other e-bikes at top speed, balletically in sync with the flow of city streets. He had the peripheral vision of a bald eagle, and yet he failed to track my presence. It's not that I'd expected the couriers to notice me. I'd been invisible since I was 53. That's an old story, and not this one. But the day the courier stumbled into me, like I was a fire hydrant or a construction cone, an obstacle to be gotten around, was when I understood that I wasn't just invisible, but had dropped out of the picture altogether. I began to wonder if my own peripheral vision had become an inconstant companion, bumping into furniture, because I'd lost my coherence with the world. For most of life, everything around you joins together into a remarkably detailed story that you take in at a glance as you move through space. A story you're at the center of, the hero of, even. In my fantasy life, and my writing life too, the main settings are detailed and brightly colored, What was happening on the grassy patch just off the sidewalk where the courier had collided with me? I don't know. It didn't figure. I've never...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?